Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Glad you could be here. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Today, I have a great guest joining me. I have Charles Love, Executive Director of Seeking Educational Excellence, host of the Charles Love Show on AM 560 The Answer, and co-host of Cut the Bull podcast, and author of Race Crazy, BLM 1619, and the Progressive Racism Movement. Charles, thank you for coming on. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. It's great to be on.
Well, I'm glad to bring you on because I referenced you in one of my campus reform articles, and I feel that your story was actually pretty important because it highlights the insanity of what we're witnessing today. So we're going to start there. In the article, you wrote an op-ed for Newsweek that explains how you sent your child to kindergarten and they talked about STEM and that he was going to be getting STEM lessons. So can you tell the audience your son's experience with STEM?
Right. I want to quickly set it up for them in the sense that two things. My purpose when I write and talk about this stuff is to explain to people what it does in practice, because you see a lot of arguments about all these terms and these things happening in school. People are upset about it. People are saying that you have no reason to be upset, and they paint this beautiful picture. And I try to assume positive intent. So let's assume some of them even are doing it because they think it's helpful. Let me tell you how it really affects kids and what's really happening. That was one. And to set up the story you're talking about, you got to keep in mind. So my son, I'm in New York now. And so, in most of the country, based on your birth date, that dictates when you start school, right? So if you're born after school starts, you wait to the next year. So in New York, it's calendar year. Anybody born in that calendar year. So January 1st, December 31st, they're in the same grade. So that's a big difference in really young kids. So I say that because my kid at the time, it was the first couple of weeks of school, was a 4-year-old kindergarten. So we're talking to a 4-year-old. And so they sent out an email to parents announcing this exciting news that they were going to start teaching STEM in kindergarten before they had started in first grade or second grade. So this is really cool. So like most normal parents, I thought that meant great. A very entry-level version of botany and of architecture, of shapes and engineering, things of that nature. So he comes home. And the first lesson was women in STEM, because women have been marginalized. And I thought, that's odd. I mean, so I set up a meeting with the teacher and we all get on Zoom because it's during COVID. And I said, you wanted to talk to us? I said, yes. And I explained the same thing. I just thought it was odd, whatever. And one of them, I believe it was the principal. It was either the principal or the STEM teacher said, but it's true. That was their response. But it's true. Not knowing they were dealing with me, to which I quickly responded, so it's rape and murder. So which week is the rape and murder course?
And what was their response to that?
They just looked at me, kind of shocked and like, well, they need to know this. And I go into the fact that how you really, if you want more women in STEM and more blacks in STEM, which is not everybody's goal, and it doesn't make you racist if it's not your goal. But if that's your goal, how their approach is antithetical to actually getting more of them into STEM. The solution's easy. You teach them STEM. And you teach them in a way that they're interested, and make more of them want to do it. What you don't do is tell them, you should be in STEM because, 6 generations ago, you wouldn't have been allowed to do it, and put pressure on them and make them upset at 4 and 5.
Well, it's so true. And when I look at that, this idea that, women are marginalized and don't go into the STEM field, they never bring up that, more men major in the STEM fields, that women are making a choice not to major in the STEM fields. And it's not necessarily just simply because they're being shut out. It's not like we have a whole host of women that have STEM degrees that are unemployed and can't find jobs simply because they're women. If they have a STEM degree, I could guarantee you they most likely have a job. But we're talking 4- and 5-year-olds here. Now, how did your relationship with the school progress after that? Did they understand where you were coming from and decide that they're going to start to modify certain lesson plans, or did they just ignore you?
Well, they did not ignore me. It's interesting you asked. Now, it's like it could be like a typical movie, the progression and as the story flows. So it ends with somewhat of a happy ending, but it got a lot worse before it got better. So I had other meetings. I had a lot of meetings with my teachers and principals at that time over all kind of little things. I don't know if I wrote in that article, but there was he came home from a Martin Luther King assignment and asked me if he could be a slave. I don't know what slavery has to do with Martin Luther King. So we had that. And then I was on a Zoom call with the principal. They were, to their credit, they were going to roll out some DEI stuff. And they instead of just implementing it, they said it'd be best to ask parents. So I got the call. I was on the call with several other people, and they were just giving you the textbook ally, feel good, help the Black, which is great, but help the Black because the Black can't help themselves kind of talking points. Blacks are this, Blacks don't do this, they need more of this, we need to reach this, culture of this. So it's just all the buzzwords. So I just listened, and at the end I said, I have a question. I've been listening to the way you're talking, and it got me thinking, and I'm a little concerned, so I want to ask a question to clarify. So I said, do you think that Blacks are oppressed today, not Jim Crow, not slavery, and do you think that Blacks are inherently different from whites? They were like, you asking me, or everybody can answer if they want. And to a person, it was like, yes, yes, yes. They all said yes. So I'm like, so I got them on the things. They started the call with saying, we want to treat every student the same. And I said, but that's impossible. It would be immoral for you to treat my kid the same if you're openly telling me he's different, right? You wouldn't treat a kid with a severe physical or mental disability the exact same as you would another kid. That would be terrible teaching. So if you're telling me my Black kid is different, then you're not going to treat him the same. Either you're lying or you're a bad teacher to treat this oppressed invalid the same way. So, we got into some heated conversations after that. Fortunately, the racist teacher principal retired, and the assistant principal became the principal, who, though we don't agree on everything, we have wonderful conversations, and she's Black, so she doesn't think Blacks are inferior. So that changed things overnight.
Well, that's always a good thing. Now, Charles, we have to take a quick break, so everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS. Welcome back, everyone. So, Charles, I know how you feel, but how did other parents feel? Did you speak to other parents? Did they reach out to you at all? Did they hold the same sentiments that you did?
That is a wonderful question, because that is the bigger problem. This is the reason I podcast and the reason I talk to people. Not because I think I'm right about things, I am, but not because I think I'm right. I don't podcast because I'm right, even though I'm right. I podcast and I write op-eds because normal people, I truly believe, think like me. They're either too busy to pay attention, or I got other stuff to do. I don't have time for that fight. So yes, the positive and the negative of that is, yes, when asked about it, the parents will say, yes, you're right. So we'll get an email about something. Did you get the email? Yeah, what'd you think about that? I don't think that's right. So they agree with me. So that's a good thing, right? No, because did you say anything? No, right? So why do I have to be the martyr? Why is it my job to go out there and take the arrows and have the teachers or the principal look at me like, oh, he's a troublesome parent, or oh, he's one of those alt-right people or whatever? If we all did it together, they wouldn't think it was political, because nothing I'm saying is political. But if the guy who goes on conservative shows says it's political, but me and all the parents say it's just good parenting. So that's the downside, is people tend to not say as much. But I guess the good thing is they do tend to agree with me when I bring it up.
But why do you think there's this cowardice out there that exists where, obvious truths, right? When we look at truth, it doesn't depend on our acceptance of it to give it its binding force of validity, but obvious truths, 80% of people regardless of political opinion, would say, yeah, genital mutilation on children is wrong. Yeah, indoctrination children with gender ideology is wrong. Yeah, teaching children that you're oppressed or you're the oppressor based on the color of your skin is wrong. Why is there such silence out there, in your opinion?
Well, no, I know why. And I'll make you feel a little bit better by it, because in the sense of, well, there's a large segment, let's be real. There's a large segment of parents who use schools as daycare, right? So I drop the kid off. It's your job to teach him and to keep him in line. Call me if he messes up. That I'm a parent. If he does something wrong, we can have a conversation. But other than that, leave me alone. I'm going off to do my day. So to them, they don't really know. And then you made some interesting points. You pointed out some things that, and 80% is low. I'm hoping it's more like 95% of people agree with that. But the other thing I try to educate people on, especially when I go out and I speak a lot to teaching and parent groups across the country, and most of them tend to lean right. And what they need to understand is, just like we want the left to understand nuance, you need to understand the nuance of what's going on in school. If it was just the worst case scenario, so the things you see on Twitter and in the news are absolutely true, and they're bad. I'm not saying they're not true, but they're not the norm. So a parent isn't pushing back against gender mutilation and the trans thing, because that's technically not the way it's happening, because it's happening in almost all schools. But that is happening to that extreme is rare. I'll give you an example with my kid. What really happens is a slow burn. So by the time they get to middle school, that's happening. In elementary school, so first grade, maybe not kindergarten, first grade, my son has stuff like gender week, gender, what do you call it? Gender, not identity. It was like basically gender stereotype week. So they were trying, it's the typical, a girl can play, be a cowboy if she wanted, and a boy can do this if he wants to, which technically is true, but to a 5-year-old, they're not getting the nuance of it. So the way they're saying it is, it's like, so in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. So if I'm a busy parent and I just see they're going to teach my daughter that if she wants to be a tomboy, she can, I'm okay. Are they going to teach my son that just because he wants to play with a doll doesn't make him a girl or gay, which is technically true. That's fine. But that's not what they're teaching. The books that they use to teach that are Jacob's New Dress, about a boy who wants to wear a dress to school. That's not the same thing as playing with a doll. That's wearing a dress to school. No. Or, Sparkle Boy, about a 3-year-old boy who wants to wear makeup and all that stuff. So it's the most extreme versions of, right? And so the reason this is with the principal that gets it. So this stuff comes from the state, right? So it's not like the principal's pushing it off, but she wants to be inclusive. I mean, she wants to be fair to every kid. I get that. So when I explain what it's really doing, unlike the first person, she's like, oh, I didn't think about that. You're right. Let's talk about that. Because instead of arguing and getting upset, DEI, I'll just say, okay, one, is it academically advantageous to the kid? Because your job is to teach. If it's not helping them, it shouldn't be in there. So I had some things pulled from curriculum just because the principal admitted it's not helping them. Boom, gone. Some things she said, I'm okay with it, Charles, but I agree with you that it should be at the 6th grade level, not the 3rd grade level. Boom, that was gone. No argument, this is coming from her. And then the third thing where we had a nuanced conversation is, I said, if you want to teach about things, because their argument is, there's a gay kid, that kid feels, there's a straight kid with gay parents. They feel isolated because they don't see parents like them. So I'm not fully on that. You got to see everything like me. Like I can only learn math if it's Black teachers in the classroom. I don't believe that. But I can see that some people do need to see that. So I'm not even arguing that you have books that have gay parents. What I'm arguing is all the books have gay parents and none of the books have a father, which is the fact. My son actually came home one day and say, oh, there are no books about my daddy. Because it was always the heroine. It was always grandmother, grandpa, the mother. So you're so focused on making the single mom feel comfortable and so focused on making the gay couple feel comfortable that you're ignoring the 90% of the traditional families, right? So now traditional families aren't in the book. And so she's like, oh, so it's both, right? So you're saying the issue isn't that we're teaching that, it's the fact that we're excluding norm. That makes sense. So they had never even thought about it. I said, do you know you never gave my kid a book written by a man? And they didn't realize it, right? Because you have mostly women in school. It's not a liberal bias, though, really. It's just literally you got a bunch of women in education over a course of decades. They think like women. So they're like, hey, what's the point that everybody and every teacher he has is a female and everyone in the class is a female and every book is written? They never even thought about it. So I kind of mentioned it to them and then they changed. So it's not like they're Mr. Burns, like, how can I indoctrinate? Right? It's not that serious all the time and not that direct, but it still has a negative effect. I see why people are complaining, but they have to change the way that they go about attacking it as opposed to walking into school assuming that's an adversary, and that teacher or parent is just some blue-haired leftist who's trying to, make my kid an activist. Although some of them are.
Well, and you're in New York, I'm in New York, been here my whole life. When we actually examine it, a lot of it isn't necessarily teachers, right? There's a lot of teachers that don't want to be pushing this. It's the subtle way that the State Board of Regents will push this and infuse it into the curriculum. So just to give you an example, my son's in 8th grade. He came home the other night with a homework assignment, and he's on monopolies now and corporations and corporate greed and all that stuff. And he had to read a document. Now, the document was purely Marxist. There was no nuance to it. I mean, it was just blatant. And I'm like, okay, I like that you are learning about communism and Marxism, but it should be told that that's what you're learning about. More importantly, why didn't the teacher give 2 documents so you could read and analyze both of them and then formulate your arguments? Right. But that's not what happened. When we look at it, a lot of it is subtle that's going into the curriculums, and it's coming from the state apparatus, the state education apparatus, not necessarily the local school boards, correct?
No, without a doubt. Now, see, to that, we talked earlier about parents that don't speak up. There are teachers that I get fair job and all that stuff, but you're protected by a union, right? So I would go into class. No one knows left, right, or center what your views are as a teacher. That's the problem with the right pushing back legislatively against it. Like, I'm against it, but Chris Ruppel's. But I say the issue with that is that you when you catch them, you do what you want to. But teachers close the door, and unless some kid videos or said something, that's usually the higher grades. But K through 6th grade, that teacher can close that door, and you can have the most right-wing curriculum or the most left-wing curriculum. And that teacher, based on their views, can teach it whatever they want. So if I'm a conservative, I'm in the classroom, you give me all the 1619 project and mandate that's all I teach. I wrote a whole book about it. I can teach it. I'll teach my book. It has direct quotes from it. So I'm technically teaching the 1619 project, but I'm telling you how it's flawed. I'm telling you what's right. I'm telling you what's wrong. I'm telling you what they leave out, yet I'm teaching what you want me to teach. So some of these teachers who don't agree with this stuff need to be creative about how they teach the curriculum, because the curriculum, Florida got that backlash, which is insane because it was a 234-page Black history thing, and it was the most robust Black history in the country, and they're being argued that they don't want to teach Black history. Asinine. That proves that people are low information. But beyond that, you can't teach all that in a school year anyway. So what you do is you take what you want to take from it. So that's the key. The key is if the teacher is a really good teacher, even if the teacher's coming from the left, if they do a good job, that student can walk out like we all went to school and came out and didn't know what political affiliation our teachers were. That's a new thing. I didn't know what my teachers were just telling me stuff. War, this happened, the left did this, slavery was this, Republicans did this, that. They just gave me facts and then I figured it out. It's not like they were telling me people were bad. So the teachers who you say disagree with this stuff, now there's other fronts. There's people fighting legislatively. There's people who joining school boards, all that kind of stuff. But in the classroom, you're the king. You get to dictate what the conversations are. You write your curriculum for the day and what you're going to cover. And you need to be even keeled regardless of what the curriculum is.
Well, and that's a great point. I mean, I teach college, so I have a little bit more flexibility. But now in the SUNY system, students, in order to get their college degree, they have to take DEI certified courses. That is now a degree requirement, regardless of whatever you're majoring in.
Right.
So since I control the political science department, I just put in my curriculums for the DEI certification, where it says that we have to talk about race in my class. We have to talk about the advances that we've made when it comes to race relations. So we're going to talk slavery. We're going to talk about advances, civil rights movement, and then present day racial issues. So it really leaves me flexible where I get to teach them exactly what really took place. That when this country was founded in 1776 and with the Constitution in 1787, that there were a lot of founding fathers that were actually against slavery. Some of them actually were in abolition societies, ran abolition societies. When did you think we became so dumbed down that the narrative that became dominant was all the founding fathers were racist slave owners?
Right. The timing when is hard to pinpoint.
Because you and I are about the same age. I mean, we're not far apart. And we were actually making progress when it came to race.
Yeah. I think that it's twofold. It's multi-layered, which is the problem. I think that some will tell you like the people who study, like Chris Rufo's book about cultural Marxism, James Lindsay and others will say it started in the 60s. And they're not wrong, right? But it was fringe in the 60s, right? They were pushing it, but most of the people weren't paying attention. But that actually helped it because it could progress and it could grow without anybody trying to tear it down because it was so small at the time, nobody's paying attention to it. So you had that growing. Obviously, it ended up changing the education school. So we talked about school board, the teachers, the parents, it's all these layers. So all of them play a part. And you talked about the state and the curriculums, but the biggest problem is really the education schools, right? Because you agree that regardless of how bad the curriculum may be, the teacher can go in a classroom and augment how they're teaching it. But not if they're taught a certain way, right? So when they go to education school, there's a bias in the way they're taught. So they come out teaching a certain way. That's part of the problem from the timing. But we created a perfect storm culturally. So at the same time that was happening, the culture was shifting. So we went, I used to joke about, so we went to the self-esteem movement, which was really bad. So now they're telling you, we don't want you to have everything overcorrects, right? We don't want people to have low self-esteem. So to fix it is not to help them feel better about themselves. It's to tell everybody they're great and they're beautiful, even if they're not great and they're not beautiful. That was
the overinflated sense of ego amongst today.
Yeah, that was the problem. But then I jokingly say the other problem was the Seinfeld. It's not really Seinfeld, but I like to make fun. I say Seinfeld ruined the culture. And I point to one side, and people say, "Why?" I point to one episode. It's the episode where someone thought George and Jared were gay, and they said, "Oh, we're not gay." And then what did they say? Not that there's anything wrong with that. So we couple self-esteem with the elimination of shaming. So you got the way they're taught in education school, the fact that everybody has an overinflated ego. And you can't shame anybody. So when we see bad behavior, we used to say, that's bad behavior. Now it's like, who am I to say? God knocks over a liquor store. Yeah, but you don't know how he grew up. I also don't care how he grew up, right? So the three of those things combined, right? So the timing's hard, but those three, there's others, but I think those are the three biggest ones. If I teach you to teach kids in a very flawed, very anti-American way, I can't tell anybody they're wrong because who am I to say? And everybody's great. So now I can't correct your bad behavior or tell you, you get a 36 on the test. It's like, well, you're still smart. You just did X, Y, Z. Well, just tell them, be honest about the performance and then, tell them the high expectations. So you can't have high expectations. So those are the three things I believe is what, put us on the fast track to where we are now.
Yeah, and that's why you see the continual dropping of standards, right? So there's teachers that are teaching that don't know the subject material. They don't know the field that they're teaching. They can't name more than 5 founding fathers, and that's a problem because you can't defend what you don't know. And
almost 10%, Nick. What's the problem?
Yeah, exactly. And then you look at the standards, right? We continually drop the standards. I mean, New York State is pathetic. We perform twice below the national level when it comes to proficiency ratings. And so the Board of Regents decides, well, we're just going to redefine proficiency as opposed to correcting the situation. And the low expectations is beyond me. Any official that has that low of expectations that we have to drop standards, they shouldn't be in education. They should have to leave education. But as far as the broader society goes, when you look at equitable grading systems, when you look at the argument that Blacks and brown people can't get IDs to vote, I mean, how insulting do you find the left's arguments?
Insulting is a good word. Just for me, lacking of logic, they simply don't make sense, which is why I just give them the argument and say, okay, so then what? What do you do next? Or how do you do it? I mean, I don't think they believe their arguments. Well, some of them do, which I don't know what's
There's
worse.
A lot of dumb people out there. Listen, I'm just going to say it.
That makes me ask, what's worse, that they believe it or that they don't believe it, right? That's a difficult question if you think about it. Because if they don't believe it, they're lying to you. They're intentionally saying things they don't believe to kind of manipulate people and make people react in a certain way, which is pretty bad. But it's pretty bad to actually believe that genetically Blacks can't pass a math class unless you rap the instruction to them, right? Because Blacks have been rapping for 400 years, right? So if that were the case, how were Blacks passing math class before the advent of rap music? That makes no sense. This cultural relevant teaching. You're in New York, they talk about that. Like the Black kids need Black teachers to teach them, and that's why they're failing. Well, again, here's a good example. I say give them that argument. So let's assume you're right. Well, we had Black teachers, and then your leftist policies took them away, right? So everybody, I think, any moral person, white and black, was against segregation. What most white people don't know is most blacks don't like integration, right? They want to be able to go to a white school if they want, but the forced busing thing was an abject failure, right? So what happened was when they moved black kids into white schools, the black schools didn't have the same enrollment, so either they closed or they fired teachers because they didn't need as many, and those teachers didn't get new jobs in the school and didn't go to the school that the kids went to. So when the kids went to that school, they didn't hire the teachers to come along with them. So the black kids just went to school that had white teachers. I thought you said they needed black teachers. So not that I'm saying that is the most important thing, but even if that's what they're arguing, like you need culturally relevant teaching. Well, you remove the culture out of the teaching. So you don't even believe it, right? So I don't know which one do you think is worse? The ones that don't believe it and they're saying it, Michael Eric Dyson, Mark Lamont Hill, what's his name? Henry Rogers, I'm sorry, Ibram Kendi, or the ones who believe it, the people who like true believe. Like I think Nicole Hannah-Jones is a true believer. So I don't know which one's worse.
Yeah,
I gotta vacillate between the two. I don't know.
To me, they're both just as bad, and a lot of them are devoid of any type of critical thinking. Now, Charles, we have to take a quick break, so everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, Charles, I've spoken to a lot of people in my lifetime, and I've spoken to those who grew up under segregation, who grew up in a segregated society. They lived it. And it's amazing because when I speak to them, I'm not someone who dictates. I don't speak for any community. I ask questions and I listen. And I would ask them, when you were growing up in segregated schools in the South, what were they teaching in those schools? What I found was amazing because they would all respond how they were taught about love of country, America as the land of opportunity and a wonderful place. They were also taught about the injustices, but they didn't need to be taught about that because they were living through them. They talked about their lived experiences, and yet they still were taught that this is a great country, and they feel that way. You hear the pride in their voices when they talk about America. Today, you have the most open and tolerant generation, and they're being treated as if they're the most racist generation to ever exist. But it's working because we see younger people, and the polls show that they believe racism is worse today than ever before in our history. And I'm like, we had slavery, we had segregation. I think it was far worse then. I'm just saying. Call me crazy, but it was pretty bad back then. Much worse than it is today. So what's behind this push into brainwashing, particularly young people, to make them believe this crap?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. The easy, low-hanging fruit is we have a president who said he's going to put race infused in every part of his administration. And he openly called the Republicans' actions in the South, whether you like them or not, he called them Jim Crow 2.0. So let's analyze this.
Jim Eagle.
Yeah, right, Jim Eagle. So I thought 2.0 was the stronger, more powerful. But remember the Terminator and then T2? I mean, that was a whole different, more sophisticated level of Terminator. So Jim Crow 2.0 should be worse than Jim Crow. So if the sitting president of the United States is saying that we are living through Jim Crow 2.0, right? But the reality of the actual Jim Crow and actual life of blacks today are so vastly different and better now. It's this conflating of facts. And if people are low information or they don't read the news or they just hear the headlines and they believe that, I mean, I always tell this one sad thing for me is that I have a sizable number of very affluent black friends. I mean, they went to Harvard and Wharton and Stanford and they're successful and they do well and they vacation in Martha's Vineyard and all those kind of things. But you ask them about their life, they're like, man, you know how it is being black. Times are rough, whatever. The police doing this and the criminal this and they're out together. I say, what's the last time you experienced racism? They're like, I can't remember, right? So they don't even realize that the way they live and what they believe is totally different from what they're saying. So their talking points sound like the headlines. But in their life, like, no one's ever bothered me. I haven't been profiled in 15, 20 years. No one's ever made a derogatory comment to me. So why are you so afraid? I don't know, but you know how all the other blacks are being treated. No, I don't, because I'm one of those other blacks. Tell me how we're being treated, right? So if they believe it, that's why they keep doing it, because it works. So unfortunately, if you can get people who are successful to believe, even celebrities, LeBron says, I'm afraid to go out, but he lives in an all-white neighborhood. If they believe it, of course you can get people who are struggling to believe it. And that's the problem with trying to convince people that they're not in this, Jim Crow state anymore.
And again, ask questions. I'm speaking to a black audience. What is the biggest threat the black community faces? Oh, white supremacy. When was the last time you had an interaction with a white supremacist? And it's like deer in headlights. Nobody knows what to say.
Well, it's everywhere. It permeates the system. It's ubiquitous. It's rain. I don't have to see it. It's everywhere. When I touch this phone, this white supremacy that part of it's everywhere. So they just believe, yeah, because I don't see it. That just shows how manipulative the whites are. They're so good, I can't see it, but I know it's there. It's attention.
Well, it's about narratives. I mean, if you look at the leftist narrative, which is totally racist, in my opinion. I mean, you look at the Black community, the overwhelming majority of Blacks are middle class. They're not living in the slums of the cities. They're not living in Section 8 housing. The overwhelming majority are middle class to upper middle class. And yet you would think from the narratives that just all Black people are poor. Now, have you had your Black card revoked yet for speaking out?
No, I actually joke with people. I said, I'm from Gary, Indiana. So you can't revoke the Black card of a man who grew up in a town with no white people. So good luck with that. But no, I don't really get attacked like Black Republicans do because I'm not a Republican and I don't talk about politics. I talk about culture. So if I were to go hypothetically to my Black friends and say, Biden's terrible, go Trump, they would give me that Black card. But if I just say, you know what, defunding the police is stupid, they go, yeah, you're right. Right. So I just talk issues and culture. But really quickly to the other thing I was going to say is that's why the only thing you can really do to people is to flood them with truth, ask them questions. So, what's the follow-up? So what do you do? So they say, so you ask that question, they say, what's the biggest thing? White supremacy. I don't necessarily tell them they're wrong, explain why. It's too much energy and I'm not going to fix them in the 40 minutes I'm there.
Well, and the second you tell someone they're wrong, they stop listening.
Right. So what I say is, okay, so what do we do? Do I stop? Do I not study? Because, Black people my age, our parents used to tell us, you got to work twice as hard to get ahead. That may or may not have been true, but it was a motivator. They never said you won't get ahead regardless of how hard you try because the system's out to get you. That's what they're saying today. So I say, okay, white supremacy is the biggest thing. So what do you do? How much has it stopped you? Well, it hasn't really. So why you worry about it? Just move on, right? That's one thing. And then I hit them with stats where I say, you made a good point, talking about most people in the middle class. Well, I say, what percentage of Blacks live in poverty? And if they're white and conservative, they give a number in general on average. If they're white and liberal, they give a number. And if they're Black, they give a number. And the lowest number comes from Black, then the white conservative, then the liberal. The white liberal says like 70%. The white conservative says about 35%. The Black person probably says somewhere around the same, little more, a little less. The reality is 20%. Is 20% higher than we want it to be? Yes. But what is it for whites? I mean, it changes. But at the time that I was giving them the number, it was 10. So yes, it's twice. But if the white supremacy was so bad, either the 20 would be much higher or the 10 would be lower. What is wrong with you? What kind of loser must a white person be to live in poverty in a white supremacist society? If just the Oprah says just that skin is currency, what kind of loser must you be to still suffer? All because race is not the factor. So when you explain that to them, that puts them in a different mindset. So you're trying to fix a problem thinking it's 80%. And it's really 20%. That's really the big difference because how you address that problem is dictated to how big you think the problem is. So if you think 80% of Blacks are in poverty, you should burn the whole system down, except it's the inverse. So that's what I try to get them to understand.
Yeah, it's amazing. You look at the poor white community in Appalachia, the poorest in the country. Nobody even knows about it, except for the people that live there that have to live in that poverty. And at the end of the day, doesn't it mostly come down to socioeconomics, that when we look at a lot of the issues that exist today, it's not about the color of someone's skin. It's really about socioeconomics and what's going on there.
That has a much bigger effect than race, but I really don't even think that's what it comes down to. I hear that a lot. I used to agree with, I say it's big. It's bigger than race, true. But what it comes down to is access and level of effort. Because you can be poor and you put in a level of effort, you'll be more likely, you may not be rich, but you're likely not to end up poor, right? It's your own decision. If you're poor, really dirt poor Appalachia, you really poor Black growing up in the project, all that kind of stuff, and you try and you don't break the law and you don't have a bunch of kids, you will not be poor.
No.
Right? But you grew up in a poor socioeconomic background. So it wasn't a socioeconomic background. It may limit your being a millionaire or billionaire, but you're not going to be poor. Right? It's your decision. Did you get a lot of people pregnant? Did you get somebody pregnant and then do it again? Did you not get married? Did you not try? Did you drop out of school? All that stuff. But you can control that. School is mandatory in America, even in a bad school. So that's another thing I want to say about schools real briefly. Everybody knocks the bad schools that need to be better. True. But there aren't really bad schools. There's a few, but most of the schools aren't bad schools, right? What they are schools with a different percentage of bad classrooms. Like some of them have 80%, some of them only have 10%, because you go to bad school, but the teacher's still teaching something. So if you're putting in the effort, you still come out. Or you get lucky. There's 3 third grade classes, and you get the third grade class with the good teacher, right? So in that bad school with all the low scores, just that nobody isolates that class and realize the school's grades are really lower. What's propping it up is that one classroom, because that class does well. So there's ways around it. Some of it's luck, some of it's the amount of effort you put in. But that has nothing to do with your socioeconomic background, right? It's the effort. And then when I say access, is do you have people that will introduce you to people who are achieving so you can see how they do it? And that's harder to do when you're poor, but that's what the mentors are for. That's what people want to give back. That's what they should be doing. Instead of giving BLM $80 million, donate monies to that. Go down to the school and take a group of kids and show them where you work and what you can do and how much money, what your life could be like if you were an actuary or an engineer.
But I think the most frightening thing now is that you have an entire generation that's being brainwashed to think that merit, personal responsibility, effort are actually bad things, that they shouldn't be putting those things in. I mean, you just had Oregon drop the standards, reading, writing, and math standards to obtain a high school diploma. I mean, that's insane to me. So you have this culture out there that's being created where we actually punish merit, right? We see a lot of honors programs being cut in schools based on the idea that they're not equitable. And so we discourage it. Path forward.
And I don't know how much time we have left, but that's a great place to leave it with, because I would say, why are they doing that? Many on the right would say because they're this, or because they're Marxism, because of some of them maybe, but that's not why. The overriding reason, I don't know if you know Ian Rowe, love Ian Rowe, and Ian Rowe had a great thing. He calls it suffocating empathy. Right? He said they're doing it because they feel bad for the minority kids who are struggling to achieve. So it goes back to what I said about self-esteem, because we want to get that self-esteem up, and they're only doing grades passing at certain level. So if we brought the standards down, they'll feel better about themselves. They're doing it honestly from a good place, but they're hurting them. So at some point, they're either going to go into the real world and get upset because they fall on their face, and they're going to blame the system because they're not going to think they should blame that teacher for failing them, or they're, because they lower the standard, because they think they're helping, you're never actually going to get where you could have been, because if you had high standards, they don't realize that people will meet the standards if you push them, and everyone around them is striving for the same standard, they'll reach it. So they just lower the standard because they think it's the easier way out, and they think it's helpful, and it's not. So they're not it's harmful for sure, but they're not doing it because of some, political angle. If anything, they're doing it because they're progressive racists, because they are like John Calhoun. I like to use him as an example because you're a historian, political scientist. You understand this. Lots of people were pro-slavery, but John Calhoun was a special kind. He was the kind that said, well, no, slavery is benevolent because the black is inferior and less intelligent. Without us helping them and guiding them, they just fall over and die. They're not that bright. So they need us to guide them, right? So that's kind of what the progressive racists are saying today. I want to help, only they said doing it from a positive intent. I want to help blacks. And I need to do these things to help blacks because they can't help themselves. They need me. So it's probably the most open and sad version of racism that we still have alive today.
No, so true. And everyone needs to check out your podcast, Charles Love. I really appreciate you coming on. I'm going to have links up at the P.A.S. Report website to your podcast, to your book, to the article. Charles, thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
It was great being with you. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.